Okay, so good morning. Welcome back. This is the second lecture for virtualization and cloud computing. Today I will go through the Virtualbox lab sheet and I will explain what we need to do for this one in the labs. This is again a lab sheet that I will dedicate 2 weeks in the lab for. So you have this week and next week to work on it. The similarities to the VMware lab sheets are a lot. So the process that we will follow is pretty much the same. So we will install the software, we'll build the first virtual machine, we will explore some of the capabilities of the software itself, and then we will basically clone the virtual machine and explore the different modes of networking that we can have in VirtualBox itself. So to install this, we will need to basically get the RPM version for it. So the installation for it is you need to go to VirtualBox, get the RPM file, and then type the command yum local install VirtualBox and then the full name of the RPM. There's a reason why we're installing it like that. RPMs generally can be installed with RPM -I. All right. However, if you have dependencies that are not already installed and you need them, that could lead you to manually trying to install more RPM files in order to be able to install the program itself. If you do a yum local install instead, the system will basically, the yum installer will go online, get any other dependencies that it needs in order to get the software to work. And if you watch carefully when the installation is happening for VirtualBox, you will see that in fact quite a few components are actually fetched online, downloaded, and installed for this as well. Once this is done, you will find it in Application System Tools, Oracle VM Virtualbox, because Virtualbox belongs to Oracle nowadays. Virtualbox is one of the oldest virtualization hypervisors together with VMware, basically, so they've been around for ages. And the reason why we're using it is because I want you to know the differences that it has between VMware and other software available for this, and also so that you can basically figure out the basic principles of operation of all virtualization hypervisors. So the more of them that you get exposed to, then the better understanding you will have of how we build virtual machines nowadays and how we basically end up with entire clouds of the things and how do they actually work, connect with each other, how we can take backups, how we can take snapshots and restore them, and so on. So the first thing that we'll need to do is build one virtual machine. So the instructions in this step basically take you through a step-by-step installation of CentOS operating system in a simple VirtualBox virtual machine. It has sort of a guide and it has an expert mode as well. If you want, you can experiment with both. I would prefer that you go into expert mode so that you see all of the inner workings of how the software actually chooses which options to perform for each of the virtual machines that you're building. There is a little bit of a task in the end, these last 2 lines. If you remember, for VMware Player, the installation that we did for the operating system was an unattended installation. So all you had to give it was the username and password, and then the software basically installed everything itself. On VirtualBox, we don't do that. And I want you to try and do that and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I want you to try and figure out why not. But the spoiler alert, it doesn't. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked for it. Yeah. So you need to do a little bit of investigating into this and figure out exactly what goes wrong and why it cannot actually do an unattended installation straight from the get-go. Once you have the one virtual machine installed, then I would like you to go around the software and explain all of the features that it offers. So I want you to go into the VirtualBox Manager so that you can see all of the settings that are there. It's basically a guided exploration of the thing. I don't tell you exactly where to go and what to click in there. I want you to go and try and play around with all of the options and see what sort of things you can do. Remember, it's a virtual machine. If you break it, you just build another one, so it's fine. So you don't need to worry about it too much. So try to make changes to the settings of the software, try to make changes to the virtual machine itself, and see what you can actually do, and basically just play around so that you explore the software a little bit. Once you go through the media manager, the host network manager, and everything else, we can start dealing with the networking side of things. So VirtualBox itself handles networking in a slightly different way that VMware does. However, what it actually can do is pretty much the same. So the types of networking that you can have in VirtualBox are very similar to the types of networking that you can have in VMware, with one exception, maybe the internal networking, but we'll see that later on. So the first virtual machine that we built by default is NATed, so that's network address translation, and it's usually the default way to do networking in virtual machines, mostly because it's the most straightforward. It will give internet access to the virtual machine without you really having to do anything at all, and that virtual machine's internet access will not affect the rest of your existing network because it's NATed, because it's hidden behind network address translation. So anything you do inside that virtual machine will not actually affect the rest of the operating system or the rest of the network that you're actually working on. So we have the NATed VM. VMware doesn't have a method for you to clone virtual machines. If you remember correctly, we would go into the file manager on the host computer, just find the folder of where the virtual machine files actually lived, copy them, and then open these files in VMware Player. In VirtualBox, you actually have a cloning options. So in the menu itself, you can go and choose to clone a virtual machine, give it a new name. It will ask you for a couple of other parameters if you want to change them or not. And then it basically does the copying itself. You still end up with the same situation where you have the VirtualBox folder and you have the folders of the virtual machines in there. You just do it through the interface itself rather than you having to go to the file manager and do it yourself. So we'll need to end up with 4 virtual machines again in here. So we'll start with VP4 and we'll go up to the rest of them. You can also name them. You can name them NAT, Bridge, Host Only, and so on, just like we did with VMware Player. We have the VirtualBox Manager. We go to Settings, set the VP4, rename it to VP4 NAT, boot, and try all of the networking, make sure that it works for the NATed VM. Then we can go to Virtual Prometheus 5, rename it to VP5 Bridged. So that will be on a bridge network. So again, the same principles apply with the IP addressing as it does on VMware. You need to give it an IP address on subnet 28. Again, it's plus 100 or plus 50, whatever actually works and doesn't collide with another IP address in the network itself. I need to point out that make sure that your VMware virtual machines are not running by this point. Okay, because even though your computers are powerful enough to support 8 running virtual machines, we have enough cores in the memory, the networking that we'll use will conflict. Okay, so the bridged IP address is the same bridged IP address that you used for your VMware bridged virtual machine. So use that there as well. Just make sure that your VMware virtual machines are actually shut down. We also have host only, which is similar again to VMware Player. So the third virtual machine in this group, VP6, will be set to host only. Again, you need to see what happens with the IP addresses. You need to check out how VirtualBox actually handles the IP address allocation for the virtual machines in a host-only configuration and what sort of networking capabilities it actually gives you. How isolated is a host-only network from the rest of the network and what you can actually ping from it and if you can ping it from the outside world and so on. We can make changes. The network cards are basically called VBoxNet something for these virtual machines for VirtualBox as opposed to VMNets for VMware Player. You need to configure them on subnet 31 this time. This will be inside the host only virtual machine itself, so there's no custom networking for VMware Player, at least not that we have configured, that we're configuring anyway. And the IP addressing scheme that we'll use will be the same as the IP address is allocated to your computers from the a2.net subnets file. So whatever range of IP addresses you use there, you need to configure them and use them for VirtualBox as well. You need to create a VBoxNet network card from the network manager itself, and you'll need to give that interface your first usable IP address So that will start the VBoxNet network card on Prometheus itself, and then you will need to tell the DHCP server in the network card settings to use the second IP address, the second usable IP address for the virtual machine that you will actually start up, and it will be in host only mode. Okay, because it is host only and because we want to customize it as much as we can, instead of using static IP addresses, we're going to use the built-in DHCP server, and we have to, because it's host only, it will try to allocate an IP address to the virtual machine that boots up, and it is set up in host only mode as well. The one little thing that you need to be careful about, and it's not a typo, is this line that says go to the address bound. So lower address should be your second usable IP address, and higher address should be your second usable IP address again. This is because we only have one IP address to give to this virtual network. All right. Each of the ranges, each of the networks that your computers belong to have a broadcast address, a network address, and two usable IP addresses. You're using the first IP address on your VBoxNet interface already, so that leaves you with only one IP address to give to the host that you're building. So that DHCP server that will be running on this host will only be able to allocate one IP address to one machine when it starts running. That's why the lower and upper bounds of the IP addresses used here need to be the same. All right. Once you set that up, we can go on to VP7. That uses an internal network. I want you to play around with this ifconfig, try to ping, see what IP address it has, see what networking capabilities it actually has or has not, and explain why. So I would like you to know what the difference, for example, is between an internal and host-only networking on Virtualbox itself. Okay, why are they both isolated from the rest of the world, and what can they both actually do? Right. Finally, there is a final task for this, which is about 500 to 1,000 words. You can do this whenever you like. All right, it's a tiny little essay that basically tells us, make a bit of a comparison between VMware and Virtualbox. You can express your personal preference and say, I think VMware is better because it's faster, has more features or whatever, or I think Virtualbox is better because it's more user-friendly, it's easier to use, blah, 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 blah. All right, so whatever you like, you will have installed and used both. So now you should be able to basically do a little bit of comparison between the two pieces of software. Okay. Any questions about this? So again, you'll have 2 weeks to do this available, so don't rush through it. Make sure you play around with the settings and everything else. I will stop the recording here.